again, and welcome to another episode of MedSchool Diaries. Today's prompt is a doozy. It's a big one. It's one you really can't avoid when you're on this path. It's going to have a couple of big words that might cause some visceral reactions, some good, some bad. But essentially, I'll read the prompt here as usual, and then I'll have my lovely co-hosts and panelists introduce themselves as they start to give their so important and so valuable responses. Actually, I think we're really well suited to offer some advice on this. We've got MCAT tutors in the house. So with that being said, the biggest discovery I made while studying for the MCAT, says this person, was the importance of doing practice questions and practice forms. On previous standardized exams, such as the SAT and ACT, I felt like there was much less material available and much less emphasis on doing practice material and more emphasis on content review. And while content review was definitely important for the MCAT as well, I found it increasingly important to also be focusing on practice materials to become familiar with how the exam writers like to ask questions and to ease my test day anxiety. Lots of reactions and ones that are still applicable to me post MCAT exam, but I'll open it up to our lovely panelists. Harrison, you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Harrison, current first-year medical student and part-time MCAT tutor with MedSchool Coach. There are so many resources out there for the MCAT. I mean, so many. So many, in fact, that I think it's sort of difficult to narrow down to which ones are kind of the best, which ones are the gold standard. And the gold standard, in my opinion, comes from the same company that gives the MCAT, the AAMC. The AAMC has a bunch of materials that are just so representative of what you're going to see on test day. Such good practice from start to finish. Full-length practice exams, question bank, section tax broken down by MCAT section. And it's just such a nice resource to sort of cap your studying. And I say cap your studying because I like to use that resource with my students at the end of their study process. I think the other part of this response that is really applicable is that it's not enough to just know material for the MCAT. You could study all day and know everything that there is to know about the MCAT, but if you don't answer practice questions, you're not going to know what to expect walking into the test. And we just talked recently about knowing what to expect before you jump into something. This is another example of that. It's so important that you not only know the information, but also know how to apply that information to the MCAT, to answering questions, to analyzing data. It's what the MCAT is all about. At the end of the day, the MCAT is please don't get triggered. The MCAT is a reading comprehension test. The whole thing, not just cars. The whole thing is reading comprehension. If you can take what you are reading and translate it into the science that you have learned and that you know, you're going to do well on the MCAT. So yes, there's a lot to know. That is true. But you also have to be able to translate that into answering questions and analyzing passages, which is, I think, the real strength of practice questions. That's really what practice questions are there for. And in fact, I'm not a huge fan of telling students to take a bunch of practice questions before they know the material. Yeah, it's helpful to sort of get a litmus test for what these questions are going to be like in the future and to become familiar with them. But hammering questions right out of the gate, at least in my opinion, and what I have taught my students before, Maddie, I see you shaking your head. It's like not the way to do it.
No.
So I'm guessing based on that reaction that we probably have some similar approaches to students and questions.
Yeah, totally. Hey everyone, I'm Maddie, also an MCAT tutor. I also script and write some of the practice material that you do see all over the MedSchool Coach page, MCAT Go, stuff like that. So I kind of have been just sitting in the MCAT world after taking my MCAT, which I know is probably everyone's worst nightmare. And honestly, didn't think that was where I was going to be as well. But I'm actually having a great time because I can, as Harrison said, give knowledge to people who are going through the process right now. Just to hit on what Harrison was talking about at the end about like practice materials. I do think you should hold off on the bulk of your practice until the end. We call it like phase 3 of your study time, and really focus on getting to learn the language of the AAMC while also testing your knowledge. I think those are two very different things. And because those are two different things, I will add like a qualifier to what Harrison said, that I think you should take a diagnostic because the test is a reading comprehension test. So if you're bad at vocab, if you don't remember what the purpose of a semicolon is, like that kind of stuff, brushing up on that, and then doing your daily cars passage, and then really hammering those things, really just beating it over the head, just to get it into your system. And then when you get to phase 3, you have built up all of those basic foundational reading comprehension skills, and then you're going to combine them with your content knowledge, and then that's when you're going to see that giant like boost from your diagnostic to your first probably practice exam. Not only is that going to be like, well, that's what you want, but that's also going to be a great confidence boost to get you through that last phase of your studying. The other thing I wanted to hit at is that I'm assuming from the person who wrote this prompt that maybe they didn't score exactly what they wanted and they're thinking of ways to do it differently. A lot of the people that we see at, or that I've seen at through tutoring, are people who are retaking the exam, because a theme of a lot of us taking the MCAT is that we underestimate what kind of exam this is. And then by the end, we're like, oh, insight into everything that we would have done earlier on. And then we have to do it again from the start. So that's why I wish I had gotten an MCAT tutor, whether 10 hours, whatever, however many hours, because like when I was getting trained to tutor, we all get really in-depth training to tutor people for the MCAT. The first day, like the person who was teaching me was like, by the way, the types of questions that the AAMC gives you, they're different. Like the question banks are from the old exam, so they're not as indicative of the new exam and what they test. They're more content knowledge, not as much reading comprehension focused. The section bank questions are the hardest of the hardest MCAT questions. So your score is going to drop there. Like you have to be able to tell students these things. And that was enlightening to me. And I know it's going to be enlightening to other people. So these kinds of even little details like that, knowing that the first time, I know would have helped me so much, and is something that I want to give to students taking the exam for the first time, so we don't have to sit in MCAT world for so long. Like I'm going to do it for you so you don't have to. But yeah, it's a big test. There's so many resources out there. I personally watched a lot of vlogs of people studying, because usually at the beginning, they're like, oh, I'm going to do all of these things. And I totally resonated with that. And then I scrolled up their feed, and then the most recent video was how I would have done it differently. And then you watch that first, and then you can see their process going through it. I think that's a very valuable resource if you can't afford something like the tutoring. But I think what the general theme is just sitting with someone and taking their experience, whether that's through the internet or through a tutoring service like MedSchool Coach offers.
I couldn't agree more with both of you. As someone who is not an MCAT tutor, but someone who took it and made many mistakes along my way, many of which you've mentioned, and some we've even talked about in previous videos, I could sit here right now and get on my soapbox and make the things I would have done differently YouTube video right now. There are so many, one of which is not getting a tutor. I sort of wung it on my own. I just thought, absolutely, there's no way. I like, one, probably can't afford it. Two, there's like, I won't have the time or something like that. And in hindsight, there are ways to afford it. There are programs. The AAMC also offers a ton of resources, and also it never hurts to just reach out to any of the people that you're interested in working with and saying, here's where I'm at, here's what I'd like to be. I really value the resources and support you can offer. Can we work together? So many times I wish I had done that. And then I also had to learn the hard way. Maddie, you were talking about how like watching vlogs was super helpful for you, and for me too. But I realized a little late that like I had convinced myself that that was studying, and I would watch like 3 hours of vlogs of how to take the MCAT, how to study for the MCAT, how would I study differently? This is what you need to do in order to do it. I would watch 3 hours of these things and I'd be like, wow, it's gonna be great. I feel so much better. I feel like I'm gonna be so prepared, but I had not opened a single book in those 3 hours. So as comforting as it may feel to sort of collect all the information, don't forget to like actually open your books. Don't be me. And then content review is so crucial, but I completely agree. I think we're on this new wave of sort of quizzing yourself consistently is what learning has become these days, and what I'm really being indoctrinated into now as a medical student. Quiz yourself early, quiz yourself often. And a lot of like the exams moving forward in my life are question bank based. As I'm getting ready for my clerkships, everyone's saying, oh yeah, I just do big question banks and I start them from the beginning. I haven't done much review, but that's okay. We're going to learn it. And I found myself in that position during my MCAT study time. And I was like, wow, I'm getting so many questions wrong. This doesn't feel good. I'm learning through my mistakes, which is good, but I ended up having to sort of put that aside and say, I need to build a foundation first. No sense in hitting rock bottom over and over and over again until I'm ready to start to blossom. And I wish every single day I had gotten these pearls of wisdom earlier on rather than learning them the hard way. There's no shame in asking for help. These are all people that would have been there to help me succeed and do even better than I ended up. I learned about the AAMC sort of like intensity the hard way because I'd been studying, took one practice exam, and I was like, what the heck just happened? Why was that so hard? And then I ran to some advisor crying. I was like, it's over. Like, I don't know what to do. This is not what I thought. And they're like, don't worry. You usually score higher on exam day. I was like, I wish someone had warned me about this. I would have not, instead of wasting 3 hours watching vlogs and then 3 hours crying about this, I could have just studied and knew what I was getting into. But yeah, I think knowing what resources are available to you and knowing that people are a resource, tutors are a resource. It doesn't always have to be paper and books and vlogs. And making your study plan and doing your best to stick to it, but knowing that like life happens. And if you're not feeling ready when the time comes, take a word of advice from someone who postponed their exam twice. It is a-okay. It is a-okay. I would have rather studied longer and scored better than just like wung it. And that's probably the one thing I like knew for myself because I just sort of trusted my gut on that one. But definitely, I'm feeling like I got such great information just a little too late in my life. But don't you worry, applying all of this to step 1 and 2 and all the exams to come. And this really applies to any big exam in your life. I'm sure there's a tutor out there. Shoot your shot. Truly, you never know who is willing to help you. And here is a great place to start. I know just working with the two of you for as long as I have, it's a great resource.
So one of the resources that I liked more than probably any of the others that I ever used was actually a podcast. It's called the MCAT podcast. It's with Dr. Ryan Gray. And I think it is in association with Blueprint Test Prep. And Blueprint actually has an MCAT expert that comes onto the podcast with Dr. Gray. And they talk through a bunch of MCAT concepts, and that whole part is great. But what I thought was really useful for me personally was that they will actually go through passage by passage, one passage per episode, full length practice exams from Blueprint. And the blueprint exams that they go through are honestly, they're pretty good exams. They're fairly representative of what I saw on test day, and I think that's a general consensus among pre-meds. But they'll go through it passage by passage. And the funny part about it is Dr. Gray has been a practicing physician for years and years. So his MCAT knowledge is decades behind him, right? He has not studied for the MCAT for decades. So he honestly doesn't really know a whole lot about the MCAT and about the science needed to answer MCAT questions, which is actually a good thing because he will, talk about, oh, well, in my practice, I use X, Y, and Z, but I'm not really sure how it applies to this. And the MCAT expert can then kind of bring the two worlds of like MCAT test prep and practicing physician together to give the listener an explanation about, yeah, Dr. Gray is right because ABC, and this is how it applies to the MCAT. What you need to know for this question is XYZ. So it's a really, really informative resource and kind of an interesting and fun way to get under your belt a full length exam, even though you're not really taking it, pen to paper, or I guess finger to mouse and mouse to screen. You're still thinking through the concepts and you're still thinking about the passages, even though you're not sitting there reading them. They do a really good job of making sure that if there are passages that are not sort of conducive to podcast episodes, they just eliminate them. So the passages that they cover are definitely ones that you can sort of think about conceptually. You don't really need to sit there and look at a figure all day. You can if you want to. I think they also post the podcast on YouTube or something that you can follow along. I never did that. I just followed along listening. But it was a really, really nice resource for me because I could do it when I was driving to school, walking my dogs, going to the gym, anything that I was doing that took me away from like sitting down and studying for the MCAT. I could just throw in, an earphone and listen to this podcast and feel like I was studying. And it honestly, I think it really helped me bolster my MCAT knowledge for test day, but also helped me with the strategy and the approach of, these are the types of questions that the MCAT will ask. This is the actual distinction and like categorization of this question. So it kind of covered all the bases for me. And while I would not recommend just doing that, I think it was a very nice sort of supplement to other things I was doing. But I know, Maddie, you have like some other resources as well that you use for your students that are actual, I said pen to paper, but it's not pen to paper anymore, mouse to screen resources, right?
Right. But I want to say, like, I think podcasts I wish I was a podcast person. I just have the attention span of like a goldfish, so I have to have something in front of me to fiddle with. But I do think if you use podcasts as like a way to exercise your brain muscles to be able to do things mentally, because on the MCAT you don't have time to write notes, really. You can't outline a full passage. You can't always think through like, okay, the glycolysis pathway, I'm going to draw it out. You don't have time to do that. You have to be able to like work with knowledge that's in your head. So I think podcasts are a great thing that I wish I had just had the mental capacity to do. But because I didn't have that capacity, I really, really, really loved UWorld. I feel like when I was trying to glean information from my pre-med friend, they're like, this is the only way for you to learn physics because they give you really in-depth explanations. They're like textbook explanations for each of their practice questions. If people don't know what UWorld is, it's a company that you just buy question banks from them. So you buy a subscription, and then they have cars questions, all the bio, psych, soc, chem phys. And what's really cool is that they separate them by topic. So if I was trying to save all my AAMC material for later, right before the test, before test day, and I was struggling through physics, I would click, okay, today I studied electrostatics. I'm going to give myself a 5 to 7 question, because that's like a passage a little quiz that's going to point out, okay, you're really bad at finding out what current is, and you need to digest the information maybe in a different way instead of just kind of like reading the text, or maybe you need to go on Khan Academy and take their like watch one of their like AP physics videos, or they have an MCAT course as well. That's actually really great too. But yeah, I gave myself little quizzes, and then at the end of every week, I would give myself like a 40 set or build up to a 59 question set because that's how many questions are in the 3 science sections. And then kind of judge my progress there. It's like taking if I took 2 59 sets, that's taking a half length MCAT exam. So I wasn't only just testing my content knowledge, testing my reading comprehension, I was also testing my timing because you can set a timer or you can turn off a timer. It's a very like study friendly interface, I think. So you can turn on explanations or turn them off. So you can take the whole section without seeing any explanations and get your score at the end. Or if you're just studying, then you do one question, get it explained, try another question, get it explained, and go from there, kind of like that. Yeah, so I think UWorld was a very powerful tool, and I know that they offer UWorld for other med school exams, or like the steps and stuff like that. And I hear good things about those too. So maybe Olivia, you're kind of like trying to figure out what materials you need there.
Definitely. Yeah, UWorld runs the step 1 exam. It really does. It's second only to the test makers. As soon as we got here, they were like, yeah, you just need to buy it. I'm actually just got an email about a discount that came through. And I will admit, this is going to be the most expensive study resource I purchase. And I usually like dodge them. Like throughout the MCAT, I used entirely free resources. I think the most expensive thing I bought was resources from the AAMC, and I intentionally waited to only spend my money on that because I really couldn't afford anything else. So I used a lot of free resources. You guys mentioned a couple like Kaplan, Blueprint. They have like free half or full length that they offer. If you Google, there is a free resource out there. I had found websites that I can't recall to this day, but if you just Google for long enough, there are people who have designed full study plans. Like if you're starting at this point, literally from ground zero, here's an 8-week, 10-week, 12-week, etc. plan customized for you. There are services that you can go online and input, like, here's how many hours I have to dedicate. Here's the book that I'm using. Here's any other resource I'm using, and how long I want to study. And they will make the schedule. They'll like separate the chapters and like do it for you. I think that was Blueprint, but I can't remember. And that was completely free. And then I think I saw one person that I just tried to Google but can't find. But Harrison, you mentioned Dr. Ryan Gray, and he was one. Although I didn't listen to his podcast, he has a wealth of resources related to the MCAT and even beyond the MCAT, like interviews, all of the things. I think I'm going to be circling back to something he makes here pretty soon because I'm sure he's got things for people in my position. But there are tons of resources, and it's really up to how you want to allocate your own resources. And in hindsight, I think you definitely would have allocated some things differently, but there are totally opportunities to get help regardless of your means, and regardless of how much time you have. There are always going to be people or resources willing to work with you. But to answer your question, Maddie, absolutely, UWorld is what I will be doing. Unsure at what point I should start using it, because I know even now we've talked about, and it is sticking with me, maybe I shouldn't jump right into doing questions and should do some content review first. But thinking of sort of separating it in that way and maybe using my textbook first for a couple weeks and then jumping into the question banks. But they're expensive, but seem to be very worth it. And they are always offering discounts. Whether large or small, they're always offering discounts. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, so there's just like we've been saying, there's a total wealth of information out there. One of those that MedSchool Coach offers is our MCAT Prep app, which is free, totally completely free. And what's really cool about it is that we have videos made by Dr. Ken Tao, which some of you guys, if you've been wandering on our site, have probably seen a picture of him going like this somewhere with like MCAT mnemonics or like little tiny content review kind of things. He's made videos for almost all of the MCAT content material in just like bite-sized little things. He pulls out his whiteboard and he just walks you through it, just no like BS, walks you through all of the little things that you need to know for the MCAT specifically. He's not trying to teach you really like, this is what you need in a college course. This is just enough to get you through and doing well on the MCAT. And that app also has folded into it practice questions and flashcards. So it's kind of like an all-in-one kind of thing, but completely free. So, I mean, honestly, that's kind of mind-blowing to me. But I totally recommend you guys to get on that train. But if you're not an app person, there's also a lot of websites out there with like little short blogs. Like Jack Weston has a lot of little tiny blurbs about things. Shamasian Consulting and Varsity Tutors, those come up a lot when you want to do like practice questions. Like, give me all the questions you have on hydrostatics, and you'll get a bunch of those with little explanations as well. I said no more apps, but the last app that I would wanna which I think people should look at maybe is Anki, which is like the Bible MCAT flashcard app for MCAT takers and then later for pre-med med students. What's really cool about it is spaced repetition. So Anki does this and Quizlet does this, but showing you cards not every day, but based on how often you get them wrong. So if I am doing really well with my metabolism because I spent 2 weeks learning it, then I don't need to see those cards every day. Maybe I only need to see them every other week, whereas maybe I need to see my hydrostatics cards every few days, which is kind of a blessing for me because I remember in junior high, like I had a stack of handmade flashcards and I would put it in piles like bad, oh maybe, oh good, and then I would do spaced repetition that way. So thank God for technology. I'm not that old, but like technology has come a long way, and I think in general, what's really cool about doing online prep is that they've kind of gamified the MCAT. So Anki, you have like heat decks. You can see like, oh, I did all my cards today and I didn't do all my cards yesterday. So that kind of keeps the fire going for me. Like, oh, you didn't do very well on your cards the other day. So you need to like keep your whole heat map read or whatever. I had like a little tracker on my Excel sheet. You've done this many chapters and you need to do this many chapters. And that would just send me to those sites because I'm like, okay, I didn't do this content chapter yet. I need to brush up on it, type in the topic, go through the website, MCAT Prep app, Jack Weston, Shamasian Consulting, Varsity Tutors. And that's kind of how I like broke the ice with that topic that I probably haven't seen for a while, and then was able to dive right in. Obviously, those don't really always replace a content book from like Kaplan or Princeton Review or whatever, but they're great sidekicks to the textbooks, which it's going, because the MCAT is so competitive, pairing your content review with things like that is going to give you the upper hand on test day.